Welcome to Growth Colony, Australia's B2B growth podcast. I'm Alex Hipwell. Each episode, we bring you B2B founders, CMOs, marketing, and sales leaders to find out what makes them successful and what's behind their failures. Today, Shahin Hoda from xGrowth speaks with Liam Smee, Global Head of Demand Gen, and Tom Russell, Head of Recruitment at Deputy. Now, Deputy is Australia's leading rostering and time clock software, an amazing Australian success story and SaaS platform. We're talking about the skills, capabilities, and mentality B2B marketers need to land a dream job in this COVID-induced market. The reason we're talking to these guys today is because Deputy has a really high bar when they're hiring people, and you need to be really good to get a job there. On that note, let's dive right in.
Some people might not be familiar with yourself. Give us a quick background. Liam, let's start with yourself. What's the background? How did you land here?
Sure. So my background's actually pretty diverse for a marketer. I spent years and years working in digital agencies, but more on the operations and CX sides. My first proper job was third level support for AdWords, back in the days where we still had to sell AdWords using paper flip charts in case the internet dropped out. So I came to Deputy by way of our COO, Craig Harris. He's an old colleague and an old friend, and he'd been chatting to Deputy and thought that they could use a little help looking at some of their digital channels. And I started as a contractor right before Series A, and eventually came on full time to help out and help sort of build the global function.
I love it, and I would imagine you wore a lot of different hats in that process until getting here. What about yourself, Tom? Give us a little bit of a background about yourself.
I'm another English recruiter. There are many, many of us. I did recruitment for a few years in London, moved over to Australia about 8 years ago, and moved to internal recruitment about 4 years ago for a small ad tech company called AdSlot. Then I went to Google, and then on to Deputy 2 years ago. I think I thirsted to rejoin a sort of high growth tech company, it's been a whirlwind at Deputy. It's been fantastic. I joined about 3 months before our Series B raise, so that's been a big growth year last year, exciting year ahead as well.
I'd imagine all both of you right before raising capital, so you would see some crazy stuff, I would imagine, in the company. Let's dive in when it comes to recruitment, marketing, B2B. Tell me a little bit about what's the process of hiring, what the hiring process looks like at Deputy, especially when it comes to sales and marketing.
Yeah, I mean, I'll jump in on that. We have slightly varied recruitment processes for different roles, but generally speaking, we tend to have about a 4-part process for any given role. So we have a recruiter pre-screen. So myself, I'll speak to a candidate, maybe that I've sourced or someone that has applied in for a job that looks like they've got good relevant skills and experience. So I'll speak to them, do a recruiter pre-screen, get them booked in for that first round interview. First interview tends to be a sort of 30 to 45 minute general overview interview with the line manager or one of the leads in the team, which is quite a sort of general overview. And if that goes well, we often, for sort of software engineers, we have a take-home coding challenge. For other roles like marketing roles, we have send them a presentation that they're going to come in and a challenge that they're going to present to a couple of members of the team. So we have a sort of technical sort of roles-related knowledge interview, and then we have the sort of final sort of culture add values alignment sort of interviews with the team and the execs at the end. So it tends to be sort of overview, challenge, presentation, final rounds. So that's the sort of generally speaking, that's the recruitment process that we follow.
Interesting.
Yeah, I'd say, look, from a marketing point of view, or that's a really good, clean recruitment answer. I'll give you the messy side. For us, a lot of the challenge is the big trick of it is figuring out when to hire, which could be its own whole discussion. I'll try not to go down that rabbit hole. But a lot of what we do initially before we'd even engage with Tom's team is trying to figure out what the spec of what we need is going to be, what level of, say, seniority we're going to need, what skill set we're going to need. And then critically, kind of more often than not, it's about what this role isn't going to be. Deputy's still very much, despite all the great growth and success we've had, very much a startup. And so the temptation is to sort of have people like pitching in, like, hey, can we get a social manager who can do some email? And that's not always a smart choice, right? You want people who are adaptable, but you need to still set them up for success. And so once we've got a pretty clear line of sight on what we think we need, that's when we'll then typically work with Tom's team, have, a couple of meetings, a couple of coffees to give the background, give the context. Generally, I guess as the stakeholder or the customer for recruitment, I've found that a huge key to success is to give as much context and background as I can to our recruiters so that they know, ultimately what I'm looking for, right? I trust them to get me the solution as long as I can articulate the problem clearly. I think the only other thing that I'd kind of add on there to the recruitment process is that, working at Deputy is great. I'm not gonna lie, it's a pretty good place to work. But again, it's a startup. It's high growth. There's intense days in there, and there's wins and there's challenges like any other role. And so, one of the primary things that we try to do through the recruitment cycle is to make sure that the candidate is coming in eyes open. That they've got as good of an understanding as we can possibly give them of, not just, hey, what does a typical day at Deputy look like, but what's it actually like to work here? What are the kinds of challenges that they're going to navigate? What are the kinds of opportunities that might come their way, et cetera? And so we might augment the recruitment process, that simple 4-step process that Tom outlined, by adding in like, hey, come and have a coffee and meet the team. And, the recruiting manager might not be there. It could just be an honest chat, so that person could meet their potential peer. It could be come and meet someone who's got nothing to do with the department you're working, come and talk to a product manager or come and talk to, whoever else. And then critically, the other one is come and talk about the culture. A lot of the times, especially what we find is that people who are already in good jobs, and we will headhunt, they're in a good job because they love the culture of where they are. And so their primary pressure point can come down to not just the job, but like, I actually want to know what this place is like to work at. And we've had candidates, we've sat down with them 3 or 4 or 5 times to talk through the culture and meet as many people as they can. So the base recruiting process is pretty, I guess, I want to say generic, but it's, it's like most other places, but we will bend and shift and move that to make sure that the Deputy gets what it needs, but also that we're setting that candidate up for absolute success. We only want to recruit once if we can handle it.
No, that makes sense. And Tom, you talked about their challenges and developers would take a project to take home and marketers would have a challenge to come and present. Can you give us some examples of that? Like, what does that look like?
What was the last challenge that was presented to you, Liam?
Man, that's pre-COVID. It's a lifetime ago. I think the one that, maybe not the last one, actually, in fact, it's definitely the last one, but the one that sticks out to me is when we were recruiting for our current SEO lead. We went through a few of those presentations, and I think it was pretty typical. We normally set people a relatively, I don't want to say generic challenge, but it's a generic enough question. So for SEO, it was like, hey, pick a page on our website, or we'd tell them a page and get them to give us out their thoughts and notes on what we could do with it. And really, what we're looking for is things like their presentation skills, their problem solving skills, et cetera. Like the actual, as long as their answers aren't an absolute clanger and completely wrong, then it'll be okay. The details aren't the key bit. But yeah, we saw some absolute screamers during that SEO presentation. Everyone had a different take on what they thought we should do.
Yeah. And we, like, for instance, at Shahin, a sort of product marketing manager role that we were recruiting recently, we kind of like in the challenge ahead of time, we'll give them some, a scenario of some new features that we've just rolled out, and we'll get them to say, do a little presentation on how you as a product marketer would help Deputy launch this feature in the US market or the AU market, specifically targeting the logistics, retail, hospitality sectors, for instance. So as part of your answer, consider any relevant market or competitor customer insights, key stakeholders, how you'd work with them, examples of how you communicate the value of Deputy and the feature of this segment. So there's a few things. We give them some key metrics to measure. So we just give them a scenario and then ask them to present how they'd go about approaching that problem.
Yeah, so there's a fair bit of work that goes in from their end. It sounds like a couple of days of like sitting down and properly thinking about it. If you really want to get the job, right, to get it. Who do you usually find that makes it through that process? Like, what are some of the qualities or some of the elements that they demonstrate in terms of when they come back with the presentation that you like, what, these, like, they tick these boxes? Like, who is that? And you mentioned that a little bit, Liam, when you were talking about, hey, their presentation skills. Is there anything else that comes to mind?
Look, and I'll pick up on a loose thread there. One of the things we say to the candidates is like, this isn't meant to be work for free. We don't want to get into a situation where we're kind of having people lose days working on these presentations. They're designed to take about 5 or 10 minutes of presentation time. And we tell people, look, honestly, probably no more than an hour of prep is what we would expect. I guess what we're looking at, like if we kind of, peel back and go a layer deeper, a lot of what we're looking for is that classic of how did they solve the problem? And you can, especially when you talk about like, say, digital disciplines or different marketing or growth disciplines, you can kind of begin to understand, is this person's problem solving skill set or problem solving approach, might be a better word, is their communication style, et cetera, are those going to add something to the team? Because that's really what we're looking for, right? Like someone who can come in, maybe isn't, the most experienced candidate we have in the pipeline, but presents their ideas clearly. They've thought it through. They can field questions. The biggest one is that people who you ask a question and they're like, that's a great question. I don't know, but here's how I'd think about it. That sort of honesty in their communications is going to send a significantly stronger signal that they're probably the candidate that we're looking for than someone comes in who's got a really slick, PowerPoint presentation, et cetera, but their ideas become muddled or they've gone down a rabbit hole or et cetera. So for us, it isn't just lip service. I've seen some phenomenal presentations, especially recruiting in digital, like when we get to the pointy end, things like AdWords optimizers and that sort of thing. People who've presented these incredibly detailed, like dissections of the exercise, but just haven't been able to articulate their ideas clearly, haven't kind of listened to what we've set them up as. And then when we started asking them some questions, not to challenge or tear the idea down, but just like, hey, help us understand, like you came to this conclusion, you didn't really kind of recap how or why, talk to us about that. And the whole thing has just collapsed. So it's really about that problem solving and the ability to communicate clearly is the key thing we're kind of looking for.
Yeah, and Shahin, I'd sort of back that up with, we've created sort of, interview feedback forms for different rounds so that we make sure there's not just overlapping questions in every round, but we're focused on certain areas in different rounds as well. But yeah, that is that, as Liam was saying, that critical thinking and problem solving, creativity, their analytical ability, and sort of their passion, their intrinsic motivation as well.
Yeah, so don't go down that rabbit hole. Don't go build a house of cards with all the bells and whistles, and then you pull one piece out and the whole thing falls apart. Because I feel like as marketers, we love to do that as well. We love to build these intricate systems of all these bits and pieces, and in an interview it could be very dangerous because you don't know all the moving parts. And if I'm not a deputy, right, and I'm being interviewed, I don't know what is exactly going on. And if I start to build this thing and all of a sudden moves in a different direction, it could be detrimental. Have you seen that happening?
Yeah. Oh, I absolutely.
Give us some of the juicy stories.
I'm not gonna name names, but I've definitely seen. There's no worries with making, let's say key assumptions, right? And we kind of answer on a spectrum, right? Some of I've hired people who we've given the exercise to. They've pinged us like 5 or 6 hours later or a day later, whatever the timeline works out to be, and be like, hey, listen, I don't know whether you realize, but there's a hole in your exercise, or this doesn't make sense, or I'm going to have to make an assumption, or actually, can I get some more information? It's like, fantastic. We're looking for a teammate. We don't want someone to come in and be this, monolithic hero who's going to solve all of our problems. We want someone who can come in and ask open and honest questions and work with us to solve the problem or achieve the goal, as it were. The things where I've seen people go like really kind of poorly is exactly what we're talking about, where people have just got stuck in the weeds, or they've got kind of one idea in their head that's the idea that they want to pitch, as opposed to just trying to have a conversation. We're not in the market for that typical like old school SEO guru sitting on top of a mountain like dispensing the wisdom to the waiting masses. We need people who are really great. They're going to work with the team. Critically, they're going to work with marketing stakeholders outside of marketing, like our product team and like our sales team, and really be kind of a master of collaborative problem solving.
Yeah, makes sense.
So yeah, I refrain from going into the juicy gossip, but yeah, that's the key to success,
Well, you know what? I was looking forward to some of that juicy gossip, but that's fine, Liam. I'll let you off the hook this time. Let's change the topic and talk about getting through the door, right? That the early stages. This is a conversation a lot of people are having. I've had this conversation with multiple people in the past 6 months of, okay, how do I stand out across the sea of sameness, right? There's all these other CVs that are out there. How do I make that first punch count? It's cool that I get in there and I do this presentation, but really, I mean, in a lot of situations, if you're smart, a lot of the battle is won once you get through the door. If you play your cards right, you have a really good chance. But there's also massive drop off right at that beginning where you're like, we are not going to talk to you and we're going to talk to this person. What are some of the best ways that you've seen people do, or you advise people to basically be able to punch through and get through the door and get that first meeting or chat with you or someone on the team?
Yeah, it's a really good point. It's how do you stand out from the crowd, and also, I mean, I think there's lots of wider discussions on the validity of the CV as the sort of main point of analyzing people's profiles. We again, we don't want to go on that rabbit hole. We'll be here for a lot longer, but I think when we're people are applying for roles, we're also sourcing for great talent. I think we're always creating market mapping documents where we know some great people who've worked for great companies. So if people apply from certain companies, we might go, oh, that's a good skill set match for us in some ways. So we look at the kind of companies they've worked at, the kind of projects they've worked on, how they write their CV, how they write their LinkedIn profile. If there's, some people have portfolios of their work that you can check out and things like that as well. But it's also a lot of it's in that initial recruiter pre-screen. So I'm speaking to candidates and Liam mentioned, I gave a sort of baseline interview process, but before that, I always conduct an intake meeting with the line managers and the team. So I'll sit down, I've got lots of questions to ask about what the type of person that we're looking for, skill set wise, passion, etc. So find all those core competencies, and I'm trying to see those core competencies in people's profiles. And then in that initial conversation, when I'm asking them the questions, I've got that intake meeting notes, I've got our interview process bearing in mind of what we're looking for. So it's really it's the values alignment with deputy, that growth mindset, that humble team player, someone who's driven, someone who's going to be proactive, often does really, really well in an environment like ours and that sort of tech startup. Someone who can work with a sort of half canvas, where some things are there, but not everything's there. So it's seeing people, you don't have to have worked in a tech startup. That's not what I'm saying, but it's seeing people who have that, when I'm speaking to people who demonstrate that capability of the sort of competencies and that the core values that we know works well for us at Deputy. But you're right, it's not an exact science. There's no exact silver bullet. No company is completely mastered, always being able to get the best people in and weeding out the ones who are not right. It's a constant evolving process, and we try and do the best we can.
Yeah, because I remember like so what we specialize in is like getting meetings with really difficult people, right? That's what we specialize in our agency, and I feel like in a lot of situations, getting a job is the same thing. You have someone very important, and you want to make a good impression. You want to get a meeting, and I go talk to people. I'm like, hey, forget about the CV, make a video. All right, shoot a video and send them your video. Like it's not rocket science. Maybe not now because of COVID, but send handwritten letters. Send the direct mail piece to their office. Grab their attention. Have you come across anything like this, or are there been examples?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm recruiting a couple of sales roles at the moment, and we love to see someone's writing style, sort of an initial sort of outbound email. Sometimes candidates will just send me an email sort of pitching themselves, and that's part of the job, right? So it's that kind of thing really does help out. One thing I would say is that I think emails and applications and emails, networking, if you know someone who works for that organization, if you've got a LinkedIn connection who works for that organization, if you're a marketer and you knew someone at Deputy, get them to refer you in. That can always help out. And that goes to any company, not just Deputy. So that's certainly a great thing to do. But do a bit of research about the company. Some of our job applications, we have some custom questions. If people have put a little bit more effort in than others, that can play a huge factor. But if someone's sends us a message, I've checked out your website, I've had a look at this, we have candidates that sign up for free trials on our website, and actually they can write candidate test instead of the company name, and they can actually create a roster and play around with the product. It shows that they're keen about us compared to a candidate who applies and goes, "I'm sorry, I can't remember which company are you again. I applied for so many." So
who is this again? Sorry. yeah, exactly.
And I think also, I don't need a long, arduous sort of cover note, but I think when you have a sort of laser focused application on that role in that company, that's always going to help you out. There's a lot of people who sort of apply for roles, their cover note's very generic, and so I think a follow-up note with your CV sort of going, I've checked out the website, really excited by the role, and a LinkedIn message, it's a very good way to start.
Liam, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's all of the above. It's a noisy space, right? And especially marketing in Australia right now, it's a really crowded, kind of messy, choppy space to try and cut through. So I think Tom's on the money. The few maybe points I'd emphasize or bear repeating are, the networking thing's pretty good. If you can get a referral, that's gold. But the other thing I'd say is, realistically, there's not always going to be an ex-colleague who's now working at Apple, or an ex-colleague who's now working at, a Deputy, or your favorite startup, whatever the case is. So, but that doesn't mean that, if you're thinking about it, get out there and network, have some conversations. You'd be surprised about who knows who. But we have someone in the team who was working agency side and had never worked internal or B at a startup. And, they started cold reaching out, and their initial question was like, "Hey, I'd like to work in startups. I just want to have a conversation about what it's like." And genuinely weren't looking for a role. They just wanted to learn. And we had a couple of really great conversations. They actually went and applied somewhere else, didn't get that role. But then when the opportunity to work at Deputy came up 3 or 4 months later, I was like, you know what? I know the perfect person. And so it's as much about being sort of, beginning to understand what you want and being able to clearly articulate that in a cover letter and et cetera, as it is about being curious to learn. And then, I guess having a bit of bravery to reach out. The first few emails or the first few LinkedIn messages are the hardest ones to send. And after that, it gets a lot easier. I think the only other thing I'd kind of riff on from Tom's answer is, when we're looking through, whether it's CVs or whether we're rocking like LinkedIn's recruiter mode or whatever it is, what really helps someone stand out is the way that they talk about what they've done. And someone who's accrued a lot of skills is not necessarily going to be as cut through as someone who's done a lot with the skills that they've accrued. So, I'm interested to hear about impact and outcome. I'm interested to hear about, like, what have you built? What are the challenges you overcame? Being able to say that you did the thing or got the certification is good and it's impressive, but a lot of people have that. The standout comes from, cool, what did you do with it? That helps raise people's heads above the pack.
Do you ever find yourself stuck with a B2B problem? Need a second opinion on your next campaign? Or looking for some feedback on that piece of MarTech you're thinking to purchase? Well, that's why we created the Growth Colony Slack channel. This Slack channel is like a small dinner party where you get to meet and mingle with B2B professionals, hear what others are doing, and keep up to date with the latest B2B trends and news. You'll also get access to a range of exclusive content from our podcasts, webinars, and events. The best thing about it, it's all free. If this sounds interesting, head over to growthcolony.org/Slack and sign up. That's growthcolony.org/Slack.
What are some of the things, especially B2B marketers, right? Because you mentioned, and you're right, Australian market right now is an interesting market, especially for marketers. There's a lot of marketers looking for a job. I wanted to ask, what do you think, what are some of the things that you think B2B marketers put a lot of focus on that they shouldn't necessarily be putting a lot of focus on? One of the things you mentioned was certifications. Hey, not only certification, show me what you've done with it. What else? Is there anything else that comes to mind?
Yeah, that's a broad question. And it is kind of contextual, right? Because different businesses are going to value different things. But speaking about, let's say, deputy. What we're interested in is, as I said before, we don't need the standalone hero. We need collaborators. And I think that can be overly focused. We've seen, especially in the early days when Deputy was really growing out its marketing team, we saw a lot of candidates in the early stage of pipeline who had done some impressive stuff, but they'd done it and were, kind of in isolation, and they were very almost, proud and very adamant that they had been the ones to deliver this incredible, whatever it was. And so I think in terms of, the skill set to focus on for marketers, a big one for me would be communication and collaboration. Nowadays, especially, with the business reality that we've got during COVID, being connected to your stakeholders, being connected to your team, being connected to your customers is a critical skill for marketers. It always amazes me when I meet other marketers who, don't go and talk to their customers, for example. That kind of blows my mind. And, Deputy, we're really, really fortunate. A lot of Deputy's customers are hospitality businesses. So, I've got the double whammy that I can go and get like delicious cafe food and talk to a customer at the same time. It's not always that easy for everyone, but that kind of connection and the ability to communicate is really critical. I'd say the other one that's very kind of front of mind, and especially with the pressures brought on from COVID, is accountability, to an end outcome is great. Doing activity is fantastic, but increasingly, and it ties to communication, but it's why are we doing this activity? And then critically, what happened as a result? And the skill sets that kind of necessitate, there's a whole bunch of soft skills around being willing to be transparent, being willing to be vulnerable, being a good communicator, etc. But then some of those basic skills, like understand the basic SaaS metrics and what to use when. Have an okay Excel skill set. And these are kind of fundamental things. And I think 10 years ago, you would have to go out of your way to find a marketer or a digital marketer who didn't know all of this stuff. But nowadays, especially as people are changing industries and people are moving into startup and out of startup and internal versus external and everything, I'm becoming more aware myself that those aren't universal skills. And so when you think about a company like Deputy and what are the skills that I would say, like, hey, if you're going to be a marketer, here's what you need to think about: communication, having some of those basic metrics down, and then being able to kind of tie that together into a compelling message. That, for me, would be the icing on the cake. Someone who, I talked before about the skills and what you did with them. Cool. Tell me about how you solved a problem. What was the revenue outcome at the end of the day? Yeah,
revenue outcome. I love that. You mentioned a few things. You mentioned the whole concept of accountability and being accountable, which I think to some degree ties to revenue. Why are we doing this? How is this contributing to revenue or brand? But being clearly articulating that, you talked about, speaking to customers. I mean, that's a massive skill of being able to extract insights from customers. And yes, I totally know what you mean by going and having awesome food at a customer's venue. I remember in the early days when I was doing marketing, we had like these customers who, like, they were they had like dried fruits and all that stuff, and they would bring like bags and bags of these, and I'm like, this is amazing. These days, like, we work with IT companies and SaaS companies, and I'm like, yeah, we're not going to get we don't need a multi-tenanted IT infrastructure to be delivered to us. So I totally know what you mean. That's awesome. And yeah, SaaS metrics, Excel skills, those are all valid points. Last thing that I want to ask, and I want to put this to both of you, what do you think about there's a whole movement of personal branding, right? Of like building your own brand. How do you look at that from the lens of recruitment?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's fascinating. I mean, if you're talking about, it depends which roles you're talking about as well. I mean, some roles it's easier to put like a portfolio of work up than it is other roles. Designers typically have their design portfolios there. Developers can have a sort of a link to their GitHub. So, different roles, it's a little bit different. I mean, I think it's fairly critical to have an up-to-date and well-written LinkedIn profile in a lot of professions, for instance, especially in sales and marketing. I think that's a really good starting point. Have a really good sort of tight LinkedIn, have a well-written CV. But I think, personal brand is crucial. People who I've recruited for Deputy, I've gone onto meetup.com and I've looked at all the meetups that have happened and looked at who spoke at those events. Oh, someone spoke at an event, they must be really passionate, must be confident. And I've recruited people like that. So, if you start writing a few blogs for your company, you can, I want more engineers at Deputy to write blogs. And, if people go, oh, there's thought leaders at that company, I want to be there. People want to be surrounded with other talented people. So, if you're doing that kind of thing, it's great for your profile. And of course it adds massively to your chance of getting a role. But I think, on top of what Liam was saying earlier, sort of that movement away from just skills and experience interviewing and competency-based interviewing, it's important to show what competencies you're demonstrating in an interview process and in your sort of personal brand, because you can there's more cross-training from one job to another than there ever was before. That you didn't get cross-training between jobs previously. So showing the sort of competencies that you have, you see a customer success manager becomes a product manager, for instance. So trying to sort of have an online profile that demonstrates capability and competencies as well as just the skills and experience that you've worked with, it really, really does help you land roles.
Liam, what are your thoughts on personal branding and marketers? I mean, the reason I bring this up, right, because I feel like a lot of the stuff that goes into the personal branding bucket is marketing stuff. And I sometimes feel like, you as a marketer, hey, make sure you have your optimized LinkedIn profile. Make sure you have your website up. Make sure are you writing about stuff? That's where I come from. But I would love to know, do you agree with that? What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, I agree with you. I think I've got a probably pretty conflicted view on it. It's I've people who I'd count as friends who have incredibly well curated and really, really effective public branding. They travel the world doing speaking gigs, and talking about their specialty because they're good at it and they've spent a lot of time working on it. I also know a lot of really incredible, not only marketers who consider that to be, I don't know, in a gray zone. They'll be like, oh, it's a bit, try not to swear here, but you get what I mean, right? They don't look at it favorably.
It's a bit too much. It's a bit
tacky,
in your face.
a bit tacky, salesy. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, Tom. Good rescue. Yeah. So I think, for me, I don't, sort of pass judgment on it. It can certainly help get attention. Even when you're at a company doing that kind of thing, can help build a recruitment pipeline. The times that I've been involved in something, in a more public forum, it generally then will be easier to parlay someone in that audience into an interview, or something like that, strangely. So I think it has utility. I think it's good. If people want to get into it, go for it. It definitely does help. I don't think anyone would reasonably be able to argue that it didn't help. I think the trapdoor in it for me, and in my experience, has been it's got to be genuine.
It's not the be all and end all, is it? No.
And I mean, I've met people and been super excited to meet them. I was like, man, I've read their blog or I've watched their videos or heard them on a podcast or whatever it is, and then you meet them, and you're like, wow, you're not what you appeared to be, and from a recruitment point of view, if you're thinking, hey, I need to build up my public profile because it's going to help me get a job or build a sustainable career, it can absolutely do that. But it's still got to be genuine. I can't tell you the amount of people that we've met recruiting for deputy, and there was just a values mismatch, or they were undoubtedly good at the job, but culturally, in terms of, they're fit for the team and they're fit for the company, it was just not going to be a good match. And as I said, it's not that makes them a bad person or us better people. A bad match means it's not going to be a happy relationship and they're going to have a bad time working for us. So I think that's the trapdoor, is if people who do that, if they're going to do that, be genuine. Present what I'm the ones I love and the people who I think do it really well are people who bring their personality to the fore. The famous example everyone would know is like Mark Ritson, right? He's undoubtedly the expert in so much of what he talks about, but anything he does, you are left with no misconception about the kind of guy he is, what kind of views he has, et cetera, which is not going to be attractive to everyone, but it's genuine. That becomes powerful in its own right.
You're right.
It certainly won't. Personal brand won't get you a job. It helps you. You mentioned it earlier, Shahin, sort of getting your foot in the door. But you've got to sort of display those competencies and pass an interview process. Whatever your LinkedIn profile says.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. What last thing? Give me one advice you have for somebody who's right now in sales and marketing, who's looking for a job. What would be your advice to them? And in B2B?
My advice to them would be my method for looking for roles is leave no stone unturned. That would be a mantra of mine. Some people go, "Oh, I'm applying a bit on Seek, applying a bit on LinkedIn. I've had a little look at Glassdoor. I've sent a few emails out." See it like it's a full-time. See job searching as a full-time job. So start your day at 9 a.m. and try and go on till 5 p.m. Writing, whether it's writing cover notes, tailoring your CV, laser focusing each application in, sending LinkedIn messages to recruiters, looking up if you've got connections who work at that company, asking to be referred in. There's so much you can do, whether you're seeing your downtime. Oh, how can I upskill myself? Can I do a certification? Can I do a little course here and there? That's part of your personal brand as well. So my advice would be, work really hard, leave no stone unturned, get a lot of applications out, get a lot of referrals out, reach out to your network, people you've met at events, friends of yours, people in the community, get word out. I think some people, when they're out of work, there is a natural human sort of nervousness to it, where you kind of don't want to put yourself out there. And I see it with a lot of people. They sort of go, oh no, I'm not looking for work at the moment. I'm doing some house renovations, or I'm just relaxing and taking a break. And if you say those things to try and sort of feel better about yourself being out of work, and there's nothing wrong with being, it's happened to all of us, is it means that other people aren't sort of there fighting to try and find you roles as well. I'd try and be as humble and open about the fact that you're looking for work, and get your whole network onto it, and that people will really go to bat for you. So it's develop great relationships, and those people will help you out as much as they can. And I think that so many people get jobs through a contact, through a friend of a friend, through networking. So it's my advice would be open about the fact that you're looking for a role.
Yeah, and be open. No, I gotcha. Yeah. Liam,
I should have gone first.
I've nicked everything. Sorry.
Yeah, no. Look, man. The reality is, looking for a job is hard. It's exhausting. It's demoralizing. It can be such a difficult thing to do. So I'll double down on that. It's okay to be looking for a job. It's okay to be in a job and looking for a change. Reach out to the people who you think can help. Take them for a coffee, have the conversation. It's a difficult thing to do. Don't try and do it alone, because even if you're successful, it's just so exhausting and corrosive. And it's one of those things, like, you just can't give up. So use your networks, use the friends around you. Reach out if you want to learn about, working in X or Y or Z industry or company. Ping them and be like, "Hey, can I take you for a coffee one morning? Ask you some questions. I'd love to know what it's like to work there, and just to pick your brain a little bit." But do it genuinely, present yourself as you are, and get your network working for you.
I love it. Talking about reaching out. Now, if somebody has more questions, they want to know more, what is the best way for them to hit you up, Liam?
Hit me up on my LinkedIn, Liam Smee. I think I am actually just /Liam Smee.
Okay, that's great. And Tom, what about yourself?
My email address is trussell@deputy.com. So Trussell, if you will, TRUSSELL @deputy.com. I'm the head of recruitment. Send me an email. You can hit up my LinkedIn, and probably email's a better way of doing it. And also check our website. If you see any relevant roles, feel free to apply. But yeah, always looking to speak to sort of talented people. So yeah, hit me up.
Fantastic. Guys, thank you very much for jumping on the episode. I really enjoyed it, and I'm sure a lot of the listeners will be enjoying it as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Shahin.
Thanks so much, man.
Hey, it's Alex again from xGrowth. Thanks so much for joining us on this episode. If you enjoyed it, we'd love it if you take a moment to rate us on Apple Podcasts. It would really help get the word out to other B2B professionals. If you're hungry for more B2B content, make sure to join our Slack channel at growthcolony.org/Slack, where we share the latest B2B news, tactics, tips, and chat about problems we're facing in the B2B space and find solutions together. That's growthcolony.org/Slack. Thanks for tuning in. We'll catch you in the next episode.